Hi, this is Rich Harrington, and welcome to the Mind Your Own Business Show. I'm going to toss right over to Skip, who will bring you up on today's topic as well as our guests. Skip, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing fine, Rich. How are you?
Good, good.
We've got Sandy Putsch with us today, also known as Sam to her friends. And I am really excited to have her here because she is the first photographer who I ever heard do a presentation and specifically talk about benchmarks in her business that she made along the way from start to that particular year, which is probably about 4 or 5 years ago. And she was so open and so honest about, here are the changes I made in new people, here are the changes that I made in staff, here are the changes I made in marketing, and here's how it affected my business. She's a photographer. She runs an amazing business. She's also one of the founders for Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep, which I know so many of you are involved in, or if you're not, we sure hope you will be at some point. And I'm just going to say welcome, Sam. Or do you want to be Sandy? Do you want to be Sandy or Sam today?
I can be whatever. Just happiness. That's all I want to be.
that works. Just be happy.
There you go.
You're on the road now, right?
Yep.
I am. I'm currently on tour. In fact, we just rolled up to Detroit today. So I was moving furniture in this hotel room to give me somewhat of a background, but we just arrived to Detroit. So we have a show. We did a show yesterday in Detroit, and we're finishing up today, and then we're heading to Boston tomorrow.
Well,
Very
I think
cool.
Rich might be the only one today that's actually where he's supposed to be, because I had to run over to a neighbor's house because my home office was being destroyed as they were ripping tiles off my roof. So I couldn't hear today. So a little bit better than last week, huh? My flesh tones are better.
Yes, you are definitely looking human. Although I'm in my cave of an office. This is office number 2, so yep, it's a little bit cavey-like, but y'all can see it. Well, I'm looking forward to today's show. Skip's told me a good deal about you, and why don't we just sort of start with how you found yourself in business being a photographer? What brought you into photography?
Great. We'll go way back in history then. I actually started my company when I was 17. I got my first camera at 17, fell madly and passionately in love with photography, and so it became an all-consuming thing for me. I actually got my business license by the time I was 18, started really building a business by 19, and by 20 I was paying all of my bills with photography. So that's about 29 years ago for everybody who's trying to do math. I've been doing this for 29 years. It's something that, unless you consider Kentucky Fried Chicken a major career move, then this is all I've ever done. This is literally my heart and soul.
Very cool. And to that end, Skip, one of the things that you brought up that I find intriguing, and perhaps you could set it up just a little bit more, is this concept of really setting milestones to measure where you're at. Sometimes when we're in the thick of things, it's hard to track progress, and it's easy to get depressed with where we're going. But Skip, why is this so important? And tell us a little bit more about Sandy and her milestones.
Well, when I first heard the presentation a few years ago, and Sam put up a very, very revealing slide that literally showed, here's my annual revenue each year, and here's what changed. And Sam, I remember you starting and talking about, it was like year 1. Am I right? I think you were living out of your car,
Yeah.
literally.
Yeah, when I was young, I was a bit of a drama queen. So yes, I was.
Okay, but I think what happens is that, first of all of us, we're all too close to our own business sometimes, and we fail to delegate. And so many photographers today get wrapped up in time-consuming challenges that take away from your ability to market yourself and to raise and to develop good revenue streams. And what I loved about Sam's presentation that I saw, each step of the way, she went into detail about that particular benchmark, what it meant to her business. She's got a great business head. She pays a lot of attention to marketing, both her business and the cause-related side of Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep and building that organization. But a lot has to do with her ability to delegate and say, all right, I'm going to develop my skill set. Because that, am I right, Sam? That was the foundation. Without a decent skill set, it wouldn't have done any good to build a strong business model.
Oh, absolutely. I think, like most photographers, I started out and I was driven by passion. So everything that I did, it was photography, photography, photography. And like most people, I started with my prices way too low. I gave away things. I loved it so much, I just wanted the opportunity to do it. And then eventually, when I could see that there was financial potential, I started thinking, on the business level. I was probably in my early 20s, and I started thinking, okay, you know, there's something missing here. I'm killing myself, and I'm not getting the results that I wanted. And that's where I sort of started tracking everything. And I wish people would understand how critical, you know, when you're starting a business, you're so overwhelmed, you don't realize that that information, the numbers and things that you acquire in those first couple years are literally setting the base point of your benchmark so you can see your progress. And a lot of people go 4 and 5 and 6 years before they realize that they need to know where they've been in order to know where they're going. And so I started to track everything. Now, I have been, over the 29 years, I've been through 3 recessions, so I can tell you exactly what a recession does to my business. I have been through personal issues where I've had changes in my life. I've seen numbers ebb and flow, and I can tell you how I would handle a recession versus how I handled the really gravy time where people were spending a lot of money. So the only reason I can do that is I have those numbers, I have those session counts, I have those sales averages, and I reflect on them often, because when I see trends in my company, when I see money changing or, you know, ebbs and flows, I can start going, okay, what's coming, or what has happened to make those changes.
Can we set the stage, Rich? Just to digress for a second.
Yeah.
Sam, just take 1 or 2 minutes and tell everybody where you're based, what the primary core of your business is, how many employees. I know. Am I right? It's 1 studio.
Correct. So yeah, I would love to do that, because I think, again, that's one of those transitional things. When I started my company in Colorado 20 years ago, I was rebuilding from a move, was the only employee, worked out of my home for almost 9 years, built a very large business, got my first commercial space, was 2,000 square feet, had 0 employees. Very quickly, that's kind of what you were talking about, delegation. I realized I couldn't do it all, started to hire. So I went from 2 to 4 to 8 employees. That was 2,000 square feet. Eventually, we expanded to 5,000 square feet. Then I grew from 8 to 15 to 22. At the height of my career, as far as quantity of sessions, we had 32 employees, 31 of which were female, by the way. And we were grossing at that time. And again, I share numbers. This is certainly not to brag or to boast or anything like that, but to keep that honest feel here. At that time, we were grossing just over $1.5 million. And so we had grown a very large business, very successful. But to be honest with you, I felt like I had become more therapist than photographer. I felt like I was spending more time dealing with employee issues and the business side of it, and less time dealing with my craft. So I built this monster, and then I started to look at it, and I said, you know what, this is not exactly what I want. And so I looked at my past, and I looked at the numbers, and I started to rework it, and I decided that I wanted to become a more of a higher quality type studio and lower my volume. So from there, I started the transition to scaling back, better customer service, treating the client better, and really pricing was the biggest issue. Finding better ways to communicate pricing, not only through the actual price list, but through product lines, getting people to invest more than maybe they had thought they were going to when they came in. So to finish this transition, I went from 32 employees down to, eventually it went to 22 and then 18. We're currently at about 15 employees. And the good news is, part of having your numbers, my goal was to make sure that my income didn't change. I wanted to make these global changes, but I liked the money I was making, so I didn't want to have a major disruption in the finances. So by cutting back and by making those changes, we've actually been able to stay very stable. I still have the same or slightly better salary than I had back then. I've given myself a few pay increases, but it didn't affect me. As far as the gross, we don't have to gross as much because our overhead and expenses are cut quite a bit as well. So that's kind of the long version.
Am I right that your core business, though, is still all children or children and family, or what's the core?
I started my company photographing babies. Now, 29 years ago, there was nobody in this industry really specializing in babies and children. The irony is those original babies 20 years ago are now grown up, and I've just started photographing their babies, which is an incredible transition. So I'm on my second generation, but the core of my business to this day is still the baby program, working with newborns, children, toddlers as they go through the program. But in fact, every year, the high school seniors that I photograph, almost all of them, 90% of them are children that I photographed when they were newborn. So that longevity has to do with customer service and relationships and treating your clients well. So it's really exciting because as much as I say that Baby Plan is my core, we have equally a strong family business and equally a strong senior business based on relationships we've created.
Now, you mentioned hiring other people on, and this is something that I've always struggled with through the years. You know, I have a company, I have multiple employees at this point, but the first hurdle of hiring multiple people was learning the hard way that I wasn't trying to hire myself, that if I was out there looking for somebody who was as good as me or just like me, that it was going to be impossible to keep them happy. It was going to lead to a lot of fighting. And then it swung back the other way, and I hired people that weren't talented enough, and I was spending way too much time having to manage them. What are some lessons you've learned as you've gone through different sizes? You know, let's start at sort of the beginning of those first couple employees, because a lot of photographers and a lot of professionals I work with are terrified on this concept. They're like, I can't afford them.
It's there. I could write a novel on dealing with employees. I've had literally hundreds of them now, and I think that the first rule I will tell you is don't hire your friends and don't hire your enemies, because one will become the other. So just be careful who you hire. Generally, the rule is if you can hire somebody to do something 70% as well as you can, then you should consider hiring them. When thinking about the position you want to fill, the first thing you want to look at is what's on your plate and what do you like the least amount? What is the thing that if you took it away would give you more time? So for me, right out of the gate, production and sales were my biggest issue. At that time, I did not have the knowledge and the strength that I have now to sell my own work. Giving it to somebody else and allowing them to be the boss was much better because they couldn't break the rules, where my clients knew that I could break the rules. So sales was really important for me. I knew how I wanted sales to be done. I just didn't have the confidence to do them the way I can now. So that was kind of the beginning. Now, everybody has this fear of hiring, being taken advantage of, and I can tell you horror stories. My very, very first employee embezzled a very large amount of money from my company because I was very naive and there was a lot of cash going through and I wasn't paying attention, and she ended up going to prison for it. So it was something that became, it was sad that my first experience was such an incredibly negative experience, but what that did for me is it sort of reset my pace, and I said, okay, you know what, I love people and I love trusting people, but you can't blindly trust people. And so when you bring somebody into your company, you want to have, you know, all those safety procedures that big companies have. There's nothing wrong with asking for, you know, different types of checks and making sure that you follow through with the referrals and things like that. You want to make sure you're getting quality people. I find that when hiring, it's best to hire somebody who needs a job, who actually is committed to earning that money. There are a lot of people out there, my clients are always like saying things like, I would love to work for you, it would be so much fun. As soon as they say so much fun, you probably should consider somebody else, because it is fun, but it's a lot of work. A lot of people are looking for that perfect 9 to 3 job while the kids are in school. And that doesn't necessarily work for an active income-bearing job. And so you're looking for people who are committed to making a paycheck and that are wanting to prove themselves and to grow within your company. So I think that's really important. Through the years, I've had amazing employees and I've had some very negative experiences, but overall, I wouldn't have it any other way. As Skip said, enabling yourself to, I should say allowing yourself to give up some of the control is the hardest part. When I started, everything had to be done my way and I had to touch everything. I wouldn't even let them open boxes without me doing it because I wanted, it was like Christmas from the lab. I wanted to be the one to see it first. I wanted to touch it first. And I feel like I really hurt my employees in the beginning as far as their productivity, because they were all, they were too afraid to make any decision. The running joke was, did Sandy say you could do that? And that was a real negative for my company because it stopped progress. And eventually I started to realize that not only was it hurting their work, it was costing me a lot of money. It was, you know, I was putting these roadblocks everywhere. So eventually I had to start trusting people, and even to this day I have phenomenal staff. I mean, literally there's not an employee that works for me that hasn't been with me for for up to 10 years. The longest has been 18 years from the beginning. She was my nanny first, and then you know, I have people that are 10 years, 13 years. So took a long time to find these people, but they only stayed because I allowed myself to give them more control, to let them make decisions. And it's interesting, when you allow people to do that, they really rise to the top pretty quick.
Gip, what are your thoughts here? You know, you've worked in companies of different sizes. It seems kind of scary as we try to put this all together and bring other people on.
Well, we used to laugh at in my Hasselblad days, on certain days, the comment was, what a great business this would be without people. I mean, the challenge in terms of hiring, and nobody likes to fire anybody, and one of the things that especially new business owners make with their early hires, one of the things you need to do is make sure that everybody has the same expectations, that everybody's on the same page, and then when you do have a problem, my God, you've got to address it early. You got to, because if you let things fester, it only gets worse, and you've got to be able to sit down with employees. And I know there are plenty of times. My first job as a supervisor was the camera repair department in Chicago, Illinois, in the Oak operation. And I look back, and there's so many things that I wish I had done better. I didn't have the experience. I wanted to be fair. I wanted to give everybody a chance. Now, that was on Polaroid's dollar. But as a small business owner today, business owners, you've got to be on top of things with your people. You've got to keep them plugged into what you're planning a lot of times. You've got to spend time and include them in the decisions. I mean, they can't understand why you want to find a dog to kick if they don't understand your frustrations. And at the same time, you've got to stay on top of them, especially in the first few months. As Sam mentioned, the sadness of an employee that's been stealing from you. There's nothing worse. But there's also nothing worse than having a customer call you saying, you know why I never came back? It's because I was treated rudely. And if you stay on top of those things in training and making sure that the staff you hired knows what they're doing, then it also makes your life easier. But I think the first and biggest thing when you're hiring is to also be just as comfortable firing as you are in hiring, and that's a tough one.
I 100% agree. For me, I was a chicken. I would hire people, and I liked them, and I was afraid to let them go. And I read an incredible book. If you've read Good to Great, which is an awesome book, but what's interesting is the book is really about corporations and why they make it. So when you try to apply it to a small business, some of the things I learned early on in that book, number one, about getting the right person on the bus, and there were a few things that have stuck with me for years now, and one was, number one, if an employee came to you, a certain employee maybe came to you and told you they were going to leave your company, would you be relieved or would you be upset? And that's a good question to ask yourself. And then the second question was, and if they came back to get a job, would you rehire them? And I think it's really important that you understand that a lot of times we keep people around even though they're not the right person for the job. And when I started asking myself that question with certain employees, and I realized there were people that I did not want or did not need in my company that were actually hurting and affecting my company. And it was time to let them go. The book goes on to further explain that not only are you hurting your own business by keeping somebody there, you are actually hurting their future too, because if they're not going to make it in your company, you're taking away from the opportunity for them to go find something that would be great for them. And so that helped me out a little bit because it gave me the ability to say, okay, you know what, this is not the right job for this person, and every day I keep them there, I'm keeping away from their future and their dreams and what they need. And so that made it a little easier for me.
Well, it's kind of scary as you think about this, you know, this idea of, okay, I'm going to bring some people on, I'm going to be responsible for them. And one of the things that I had to come to grips with right away was sort of two major things. One was, as quickly as possible, I had to get everything off of my plate that was keeping me from doing the core business of the work I was really talented at and the work that brought in more customers. Suddenly, it was much more important that I was visible to customers and doing not the hardest work, but doing the most creative work, or at least being really involved. And then I also had to get very comfortable with this idea that ultimately, in every job I've ever had, everybody always complains about the boss. Everyone is going to have concerns about the boss. They're going to want to complain about the boss. And I had to learn to sort of have a thicker skin. And then at some point, one of my business partners sort of became the bad guy because I was out of the office more and he was having to be the bad guy. But it's kind of funny, like you go from this normal job and, oh, we're all on the same team, and then suddenly at one point you have to become the bad guy, or you have to become the one that makes the hard decisions. Sandy, how did you grow a thick skin for that? I know that that's one of the things that a lot of people starting businesses have a hard time with.
I think that that's an incredible lesson in itself. I think that I am female, and I'm also and Skip knows me, I'm an extremely emotional person. My heartstrings, I wear them on my shoulders, and everybody knows I'm a crier, and I'm super emotional. I'm very connected to people. I'm so passionate about my job and the people I work with that it's very obvious on an emotional level. So for me, I don't even have the official backbone to confront people, and so it became very hard. I always wanted to be my employees' friends, and I think we hate to be honest like that, but the truth is you really can't be your employees' friends if you want to have an effective company. I've done it both ways. I've had, all right, everybody, if we make our goals, we're flying to New York City, and I've had things, twist and turn, and it kind of falls back on you. So being the bad guy doesn't mean you have to be bad. You can still be a good person. You can still be honest and good to your employees. But there is a line there where you'll find you'll have greater success and probably less negative experiences if you kind of go into it with the attitude of, I have to be responsible for this company, and I need to be the boss. I need to manage and direct people, and I need to try not to make it. You want to be friendly, but it's not a friendship, so to speak, in the work environment. And that was really hard for me. In fact, I burned a lot of bridges. I have a lot of employees that left me frustrated or disgruntled in the beginning, and it wasn't that I was a bad person. I really was a good person doing the very best I could. In fact, I probably spoiled my employees, but the problem is I did not keep that line clear. And so eventually I was taken advantage of, and that's where that negative comes around. So anybody considering hiring somebody really has to understand that it's a responsibility to your employee, and it's a responsibility to the people that you love, that you're going to manage and run your company as if it were a professional company. That's the direction you should go. So I can definitely say I didn't start that way, but now it's much easier. In fact, I just recently released 2 employees. They were great people. They loved their jobs, but I knew that I had nowhere long-term for them to go. And it was a very hard decision, but it came much easier now because I've been through enough that I recognize that, again, I was hurting both of us. I was hurting my company financially, and I was hurting their potential. So it does get easier.
There are 2 reality shows that are on TV now that I wish had been on television 20 years ago, which is Room Rescue and Restaurant Impossible. And in both cases, every single time, there's an issue where the owner of the business is put in a position where they've got to confront employees that aren't pulling their weight, that aren't doing their job. And it's really interesting because there are a lot of times when I see myself in those early days, and even sometimes now, because nobody wants to be the bearer of bad news, and you want to help everybody, and you want to help them build their careers and their businesses, but every now and then you get somebody that just isn't going to fit, or like Sam just mentioned, didn't have a long-term, didn't have a lot of long-term potential in terms of growing more in the business, and it's time to say, all right, this really isn't going to work. And that comes up, those 2 TV shows, I almost feel like every new photographer starting business with their first few hires needs to watch like 10 episodes of either one of those just to look at the way people issues have been avoided, and then what the result has been. Because the reality is, in the end, it's your business, and it's your responsibility, and you're going to be the one that's going to go, God forbid, Chapter 11 when things don't work out the way they should, because that whole time you wanted to be a friend and a good person. It's a tough one.
Yeah, it really is. I don't think that there's a right answer. It's just that I think through programs like today, hopefully there are people out there listening saying, okay, I don't want to make those expenses, there's a cost related to that. It costs a lot to make those mistakes and to deal with people on that level. So hopefully people are listening and realize that there is a better way, and that's just being confident and honest with people. I think honesty is the best policy, and a lot of times I was too afraid to tell employees I'm disappointed, or you're not doing it right, or we need to make change here, and I would just put my tail between my legs and continue to do my job, and then it would fester and I would resent them, and it ultimately makes a very negative situation. They feel it, you feel it, and it could have been taken care of long before that. So I've had to truly learn that the hard way.
Here's one milestone that I felt good at when I knew that things were starting to work as I grew my business, and I'm curious, Sandy, if you've had a similar result. Along the way, you know, I've had a part of my career has been that of an educator, so I've always tried very hard to teach employees and to teach them not just how to do the job, but why we would do things certain ways or why we treated customers certain ways. And the first couple of times when I started getting back compliments about employees, you know, where I had stood back and let them work and you're hearing it, then I knew that it was starting to work. And that's really hard because you want to micromanage, you want to be in there and let the client see you, that they care. And one of the hardest parts was getting to a point where I'll still be involved with every client to an extent, but once they're in the company and they've got people they enjoy working with, I don't have to feel like I have to insert myself. When did you feel that turning moment where you first felt like you had some birds that, you know, were able to fly on their own and you could stand back and watch?
You know, I think you're right. I really think it comes out of client responses. I found that it was really, I was very nervous in the beginning, and then when a client would say, oh my gosh, your receptionist is so wonderful, or I loved working with Erin, or whoever they mentioned, I would say, oh, that's great. And I think those little positive reinforcements, those are benchmarks in their own right. And it's important that if you have employees that are working with a customer and they are face-to-face working with them, you want to make sure that you're either requesting that information or you're hearing that information. We do customer surveys. Our customers get a survey after the photo shoot, they get a survey after the sales session, and they get a third survey that comes with their order in a self-addressed stamped envelope. The first two are email surveys that they can answer questions, and the last one is a physical one they can write on. And we find that some people like one versus the other, but we hope that all clients at least fill out one of those. But those have been really helpful. If you want to know how you're doing, you have to ask, because you can't always solicit, you know, happiness, but a lot of times people won't tell you the negative unless you ask. They might be frustrated or disappointed. So customer surveys are a great way to get a pulse on what your employees are doing. You do have to tie it into a requirement. We do have a bonus structure in our studio, and if we don't see customer surveys, if the employees aren't making sure those get out, there won't be bonuses, because they are directly tied in not just to the income we are making, but to the overall experience, and that's really important as well.
So, Skip, you've worked with this a bit, and you certainly have seen through the years major milestones. I know you've worked with a lot of photographers helping consult, a lot of photo businesses. One of the things that I've seen is this start and stop, and Sandy, you kind of alluded to this as well. It's very easy for things to be great. I remember when I started my business, it went from being a very active freelancer to having, you know, hanging a shingle and setting up an office. And, you know, first office was in my basement, and then had my son, and we moved out into a townhouse, and then we took over a second floor, and then we moved again, and right about now we're buying our first building if everything goes through, and it's scary as heck. But along the way, you know, there's times it's been great, and there's times it's been bad. But when I look at it and I average it out over the years, it's still slowly growing. Some years are better than others, some are worse, but it's so easy to just sort of like look at that frustrating month, or there's a gap in billing, or the phone hasn't rung for 2 weeks and the self-doubt creeps in. How do you guys handle that? What are some of your strategies to just sort of calm down, other than, you know, we keep a bottle of wine in the office, which sometimes sees a little action?
That's awesome.
Skip, Sandy?
I was going to say, Skip, go ahead. I'll let you cover this one first.
Well, there's a great line that I've heard both Ross Perot and Vince Lombardi get credit for, is that so often people quit and give up when they're only 1 foot from the touchdown. And I see that happen all the time. The challenge for me, and boy, I have seen some serious ups and downs, especially since I started my own business and left Rangefinder WPPI in 2009. To me, the first thing is just having a great support group. Sheila is the core of my support group. And in the beginning, when I decided about going out on my own, I remember her saying, well, what are you afraid of? And my answer was obvious: failing. And you have to look at the business and have enough self-confidence, and that's where your support group, it might be your family, it might be a sibling, it might be one of your kids, it might just be a couple of really good friends. And I feel very fortunate that Sheila, along with a number of very good friends, were there as kind of sounding boards along the way, because there are days when, and Sam, you hit it just now, you're gone a few days, or Rich said it, the phone hasn't rung and your business is down, and business isn't always a steady stream. We're led to believe that in box office hits, and they'll show the number of dollars on whatever last week's best-selling movie was in theaters, and you'll see it climb, and it's just a nice slow rise to the top, or maybe it's just a direct straight line when you've got a really hot product. But normally, for most of us, especially photographers, your business is going to have peaks and valleys, and I think the key is to level out the valleys and the peaks. The peaks are great, but man, that decline on the roller coaster down can be devastating, and then you don't know how far you're going to go down before you hit the bottom, and then you're sitting there waiting on a plateau wondering, all right, how long before it starts to scoop back up again? And I think being able to level out the peaks and valleys, and Sam said something earlier in the beginning about scaling back and your margin versus gross sales. I mean, the issue isn't how much money you make gross, it's how much you keep. And sometimes that can help level out the peaks and valleys. So I've gone all the way around and hit like 3 different topics here, and I apologize. But for me, the biggest thing was my support group in helping me not only understand myself and my short suits and my long suits, but the business cycles.
Absolutely.
What do you think, Sam?
And I think for me, I mean, you've hit one of the nail. I think support group is critical. The second piece is knowing your numbers and having them. I made it, I mean, you kind of mentioned that the tracking is a really big deal to me. I can see sort of a recession, even if it's just a recession in my own company, I can see it coming based on what I'm used to and what the statistics I have. So knowing your numbers is really important and preparing for it. This is one thing I can tell you, and what I love about this conversation is, Skip, when I met you, I just thought you were this big famous guy that walked around in a suit, and because it was WPPI and everybody was like, oh, it's Skip, so stars and diamonds. But what's really nice is the honesty that even past leaving WPPI, you've had peaks and valleys. And a lot of people, when I get up on stage, they're like, oh my gosh, rock star, or, they say silly things like that. The truth is I have bills and I have 2 kids in college, and I have to do a lot to maintain the lifestyle that I have. I'm a single parent now, so I've got a lot of responsibility, and I have definitely seen those valleys even throughout my history, but even in the last couple of years, I've had to really look at my business and decide what is it that I want to do. For me personally, I'm really good at making things big and bigger than life, but I want to enjoy my life too. So just in the last 2 years, I've tried to revamp my life, to rescale it, not for money purposes, not because of a recession or anything is hurting, but because I'm realizing that, as you said, money is not the greatest priority. It's not the thing that you cuddle with in the nighttime. It would be nice, but we don't. So the people that matter to you, that support group, those people are who you're working for. And when I realized that I got tired of chasing those numbers. It was 1 million, then it was 1.5 million, and then it was 2 million, and those are big numbers in our industry. And every time I hit a benchmark, I kept thinking, oh, I did it. And then I would wake up and realize I hadn't seen my kids for too many days, or I was working 6 days a week and half a day on Sunday, and I realized that I was a slave to my company. So there is no such thing as balance. People ask me all the time, how do you find balance? And the truth is, there's no balance in this lifetime. What it really boils down to is choice and sacrifice. And you really have to determine what it is that you want, and then you will have to sacrifice something to get it. So right now, I'm in the process of making adjustments so that I can be available more for the kids. That I have 2 children at home that I want to be with, and you know, these are things that financially I have to be very careful and prepare for, because I don't want to take such a big hit that I drop too low too quick, but I'm willing to give up things to have a better quality of life. So there's no, I guess my point is you can look at somebody and assume that they're so much luckier than you, or they make so much more money than you, but I can almost wager a bet that even the best speakers in this industry are people who struggle financially, mentally, emotionally, and within their own relationships. So it's just part of life.
Well, you know, one thing that stood out for me there that, you know, I had to come to grips with was, one part was getting a handle on the financial side and making sure that I could see what was going on, not panicking, like, you know, knowing, oh, well, right now we're going to be, you know, using that line of credit, or right now the credit card's going to go up, and then it's going to go back down because we've hallmarked the money. You know what? We're not going to spend that money on this. We don't need that. Making sure we're meeting monthly with the financial advisor. You know, at this point, I have basically 3 separate companies, and all of them, I have a good relationship with the accountant. And, you know, every month we're reconciling the books. We're looking at how things are trending. We're making adjustments. If I have to adjust my taxes, I'm putting more away, or they're letting me know if it was down, what I can do with it. And I'm finding that financial advice removes a lot of stress. But as far as the personal life goes, it's absolutely been a choice. You know, I stopped caring about having a fancy car. Clients never ride with me anywhere. Why do I need a fancy car? Instead, I translated that into more vacation time and going places and taking the kids to places we wanted to see. It's hard, but, you know, I've signed up to be the Cub Scout leader and the Girl Scout leader for my son and my daughter. You know, I share it with another parent, but by having that regular commitment, I'm so much more likely to be there for them. There'll be times that I have to miss it, but by forcing myself to put it on the calendar and, oh, every 2 weeks there's a scout meeting for this child and this activity. You know, I could have thought of 10 more things I could have done for my business yesterday, but I was, you know, or on Saturday, but I was out in the woods with 20 kids camping, and I can't get that back, because when the kids are 22, I can't say, oh, let's go camping now. They're like, sorry, we're busy. So I think it's a matter of choices. You mentioned it's hard choices. You know, it's hard, but I think there's a lot of things that you have to give up. You know, the amount of movies I see is minimal. The amount of things that are purely for me is minimal. But my only bad addiction is I still manage to read my comic books each week, and that's about it. And lots of things I enjoy go by the wayside. How did you come to balance with this for yourself? Because when you have a business owner, not only do you have your own kids, your own partners, but you maybe have business partners, and you have employees, and to some extent, like it or not, they become like children that you're responsible for, that you want to see succeed and grow. How do you balance that?
Is that for Skip?
Either of you.
Go, Skip.
Sam, go ahead, and then I'll jump in.
I think for me, I waited too long. I think that I got on a fast track. I mean, being female in this industry where I started, it was we were kind of an anomaly in the beginning. There weren't a lot of females with a strong presence, and so, you know, I got on the fast track, and I would hope that I tried to stay humble and keep my pride in check. But it's very exciting, and so of course it was this effort to, okay, well, I did this. I've got to one up myself and do something better and impress more people, and I, you know. You can't ever, I don't really believe you should ever regret anything in your life, because as far as I'm concerned, my entire life brought me to this moment right now, and I'm very pleased to be here and very honored. So I'm always grateful for what I've had, both good and bad. But I think it's a value system. Last night in the show I taught, I had a woman, a very young woman, come up to me, stars in her eyes, just very excited about the show, and she came up and she said, Sandy, I need some advice. She said, I have $12,000, and I have a 2-year-old son, and I want to buy a home for my son, but I don't know if I should buy a house or if I should take all of that money and I should put it invested in a business and start a photography business. Now, Skip, I'm going to ask you, how would you answer that woman? I'm just young and beautiful and just so excited because she's talking to me. What would you have said to her?
Oh, now you get into the issue of balance. I don't know what I would say to her, because what I've learned in this new chapter of my life since I started out on my own was that so much is about the things that make you happy. I'm not talking about we've got to have fun every single day, like going back to visions of what your adult life is going to be like when you were in high school. I'm just talking about things that make you happy. There are these moments that happen. I call them HC moments, which stands for holy crap. And you're sitting there, and all of a sudden you realize, I'm not happy. So I'd have her making a list of pluses and minuses, because this goes back to her priorities. And my guess is that a home and her son are going to be important, but there are ways she can do both maybe if she waits a little while. And maybe she's going to invest part of that in a business, and part of that is going to go in to a condo as opposed to a house. I don't. What did you say?
That's I literally, my brain started racing, and I think more so it wasn't what I said as much as it was how I felt later, because I realized later that at any given, had she asked me the same question 10 years ago, I would have had a completely different answer. I would have said, okay, I would have like taken her under my wing and said, okay, we're going to do this, and we're going to help you get the business going, and we'll market this, and we'll build this. I would have had that kind of drive. But looking back, imagining, hang on, this won't get me emotional, but imagining if I could rewind the clock and turn all of my children back into 2-year-olds, I would make totally different decisions based on what I know now. So hold on, let me get it together. I told you I was the most emotional person here. So you sit and look at your life, and knowing that you have the potential to affect somebody who may make a choice based on what you say. It was very interesting. We sat down, and exactly what you said. I said, let's talk about happiness. Let's talk about what we really want out of life. And what we want out of life are a few amazing moments. And if you think about it, in 365 days, how many perfect days do we get? And most people's answer is 3 or 4. So what we're working so hard for, is not money. We're working hard for time. We want time with the people that we love. And so we sat down, and for a while, for about 30 minutes, we talked about her choices, the things that she could do with the money. And you know what? By the time she talked herself through it, she realized that her true passion was her 2-year-old, and that she did not want to lose any time with her 2-year-old. I didn't coax her. I didn't try to tell her my sad story of why you're going to regret this. I let her tell herself what she really wanted, and at the end of the day, she realized that it's funny, almost exactly what you said, that her child was her biggest priority, and maybe she was young enough to take it a little slower, and maybe getting a secure environment for her son was the best choice. So I didn't make the decision for her. I didn't even tell her anything. I wouldn't dare tell somebody something like that, because I realized that different times in my life I would have guided her a different way. So I think we all have to reach deep inside of ourselves, and we have to try to find what makes us happy, and then work towards that. Try to find the path that's going to get us there. Not necessarily the fastest, believe me. Sometimes it's a longer path, but it's like you said with the Scouts and the Girl Scouts. I think that's adorable, and I think your kids will always remember that, and that's really where our priorities should be. At the end of the life, they always say this, but nobody ever says they wish they would have worked harder. So I think that's the thing we have to remember.
There's a great.
Go ahead,
I'll come in with one quick thing. There's a great series of comments. There's a motivational speaker who's somewhere around 80 today by the name of Ed Foreman in Texas, and I heard him at a program at Polaroid years ago, and he laid out an analogy that everybody could relate to. He said, here's the scenario. You're on your way home from work, and you're saying, you know what, next year we're really going to take this amazing vacation. The kids will be older. I'll be making more money. Well, next year rolls around, and you say, you know what, next year, once I get the kids through college, we're going to take that time, and we're going to do that vacation we've always wanted to do. And then the kids are out of college, and you're headed towards retirement. You say the same thing again, and then what happens is that you're in your casket on the way to the cemetery, and you say, oh my God, I forgot. I forgot to seize that moment. And I know it really sounds trite, but it is so true. And it's much easier for me to say that, obviously, at my age now, but it is something that I wish I had looked at much earlier on in my career. And I love the advice that, Sam, you wound up giving this woman, because it is a matter of isolating what things make you happy. I mean, I remember thinking that I was just king of the hill when I made the Platinum Club at Continental, and I was going to get first class every time, and then I realized that to get there, I had been away from home 63% that year of my time had been spent traveling.
Yep.
I mean, along with a briefcase, and this is all pre-internet and pre-cell phone. At least now today, if you're doing a lot of travel, you can keep in touch better. But it didn't change the fact that I thought I was doing things that were making me happy. I thought I was doing things that I had to do to climb that ladder. But in the end, they just took me away from what really was most important.
Absolutely. And I think we all, you know, if you could just shake young people and say, look, you're going to get old and you're going to have these regrets, but everybody has to make choices for themselves. And ultimately, we're all going to have regrets, so to speak, but let's try to minimize them and try to at least have memories like the Girl Scouts and the Boy Scouts and things that we can step back and say, you know what, I'm really proud of me because I may not have been perfect, but I did this, and this mattered.
Oh, there's one other thing that stands out to me that I think a lot of folks are rushing to do, and perhaps the woman you were talking to as well. Many folks undermine the value of working for someone else, meaning that when I go back and I look at my professional career, I had jobs that I liked a lot, and I had jobs that I disliked. However, both of them, in fact, in many cases, the jobs I disliked taught me a lot about how I was going to run my business, how I was going to interact with customers. And in retrospect, looking back with 20 years of wisdom, I can have more sympathy for why a boss might have done something. I have a couple former bosses that I'm, still Facebook friends with and we interact with, even though back when I worked for him, it wasn't even that great of a relationship. We've both matured nicely. And I can go back and look at that and I realize sort of the two parts. One is the often called Maslow's theory of needs, that like before you can be in business for yourself, before you can be a good parent, you have to get your own life in control. And so having a place to sleep, not necessarily a fancy place, but something you like, and not having complete panic about money is going to help. And working for other people is going to teach you a lot. It's going to let you observe. What I would always do is I kept journals, and when I was freelancing, when I was working with other people, when I was doing assistant work, I would just write down what I learned. And I'm amazed. I see so few people taking the path of being an assistant these days, or they're so concerned about starting their own career that they forget that it's okay to have mentors, and that you don't have to do one and then burn it and trash the bridge to start the other. That you can be working someplace while working on personal projects, as long as you have a good relationship with your boss and you're transparent. How do you mentor some of the folks that you work with? I imagine at this point, you mentioned you're scaling back your business from personal choice. My business is the same. At this point, I try very hard to only work with people I like and respect. Not saying that we always like each other, but everybody that I work with for a client, everybody that I bring into my business, I'm choosing for them to be there. And if it's not working, they can leave. And if it's mutually not working, I want them to leave. How did you come to grips with that, of sort of balancing that tough relationship?
I think for me there are two parts. You talked about working for somebody else, so I'll address that. I did work for other studios for a short period of time as I was starting my own business. And you're right. I mean, there's two parts. There's the knowledge that you gain watching other people's choices and seeing how they make mistakes so that you don't make the same ones, and seeing how their successes happen. There's also something to be said for a steady paycheck. I know that a lot of people, want their own business because they want to control everything, but having security and knowing that your paycheck's going to be there at some points in your life is not a bad thing. So I think that that's a really important stepping stone of that process. And then, of course, the flip side of that is working and mentoring with my employees. One thing I think I did right very early on is I walked into all hires or all employees with these, especially photographers where I was training my future. I went into it with the attitude of, I know they're going to want to start their own business. So so here's the way I set it up. I basically said, you can work for my company, but I'm not going to take you in and teach you how to be a photographer in the next 6 months. If you want to work for my company, you're going to be a receptionist for 6 months. You're going to work in production for 6 months. You're going to be an assistant for 6 months. Then you'll be a first assistant or an associate for 6 months. So in 2 years, you should be ready to shoot for this company. You should be very close to shooting. And then within that 3rd year, I will personally spend time with you and teach you and help you grow your photography. So employees who came in who just literally wanted to learn photography and get out, they just didn't make it, or I didn't hire them. It was people who saw that this path, each of those steps came with a pay increase, and so they could see that they had potential. Photographers make the most money in our studio, so of course they could see that there was a place, a destination. I was very honest. I said, look, I know that you're going to want to start your own business, and I can't tell you how many employees will say, oh, no, 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 I never want to do that. They're now my competition, so I knew it wasn't true, and I would tell them, I'd say, you don't have to say that. Whatever you want to say is fine, but understand, I expect that. In fact, I would think you were a fool if in 5 years you weren't considering, if not sooner, moving out on your own. I make a great living as a photographer. I would expect nothing less from you, but I want you to understand that I will mentor you, but you'll earn the right to have that, number one. Number two, I would expect just the courtesy of being good business people, so that when you do move on, you know, I would expect honesty and be considerate of each other's businesses. I won't step on your toes. I suggest you not steal my database and try to step on mine. And that's happened to me too. I've had people, photographers, walk out with my database, and you know what? It's karma. It always comes back to bite them. I can assure you. It doesn't. I try never to let it frazzle me, because the stories I've heard and the things that, you know, when people do bad things, I truly believe that something negative will come into their life. So I just try to keep my toes out of everything.
Well, one thing you actually do is, and Skip mentioned it early, but you know, I could tell you believe in karma. You take a large chunk of your professional time and dedicate it to a very important nonprofit. Why don't we talk a little bit specifics about Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep, as well as the importance as a professional of giving of your time to something, what that does for you holistically, both professionally and personally?
I would love to. I'd be honored, because obviously you're giving me a voice that I don't often have on the internet. So first of all, Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep is an organization I founded 9 years ago. Both myself and Cheryl Haggard. She's mother to beautiful Maddox Haggard, a little boy who was born with a condition that was incompatible with life. He actually, at 10 days old, they determined that they would have to take him off life support. And so through that situation and through meeting them, we actually met them in the hospital. They saw my work and they called me in to do photographs of their son. That relationship started sort of a bond that it's hard to believe now, looking back, how that intersection changed literally the world. From that moment, from being present as Cheryl lost her son, we photographed Maddox both while he was on life support, and then their special request was to wait until he passed away and then photograph him the way his mother really wanted, which was skin on skin, no tubes, no wires. That was one of the most heart-wrenching, emotional sessions of my life. Watching a parent say goodbye to a child is, it's shattering to your soul. You can't imagine having 4 healthy children. I couldn't imagine that kind of a loss, and such an early loss. And so through our strong feelings, we started talking, and when we first started, it was sort of a what if we could create an organization that would provide portraits for these families who will suffer a loss of a child. And it was 9 years ago, just a little more than 9 years ago, that we founded this organization. Now, when we started, it was a grassroots effort in Colorado. The advantage I have is that I spoke all over the world, and so I had the opportunity to get up in front of photographers, sometimes thousands of them, and tell them about this great organization. So through Cheryl's passion and her drive to create this foundation, and through my ability to speak to people, we ended up growing a foundation that, I remember when it started, it was first 100, then 300, and Skip, you played a big part in the membership by sharing information with the WPPI crowd. It went to 1,000 and then 2,000, and 9 years later, we have over 14,000 members in 42 countries. So it's really amazing. Our photographers go to the hospital, and they provide bereavement photography. They show up with their gear. They do an entire portrait session. Typically, those last 20 to 45 minutes. These sessions are very much like a real photography session. We try to make them as comforting and as beautiful, knowing that they're the only memory that these families will have. This is the only time, the only thing outside of losing their child that they can consider a special memory. We capture those images. Our photographers then go home, they prepare the images, they do artwork, retouching, they convert the images to black and white or sepia tone, and then they provide all of the images once they're edited, typically 15 to 20 images on a disc to the families, or they email them to the families. Now the most important thing is no money exchanges hand. There is nobody that's paid to do this. So when we think about these photographers, as far as I'm concerned, they are literally angels. These are people who give of themselves in a way that very few people are honestly capable of. They will, at a moment's notice, go get their bags, leave their families, and spend, you know, a very intimate hour with a family watching them say goodbye to their child. And so the interesting thing is, over 9 years, we started tracking the sessions. About 4 or 5 years ago, we started actually having our photographers log the sessions. Now, unfortunately, not all of them do it religiously, but the information we've gathered, we have literally served tens of thousands of families. It is mind-blowing, you know, to imagine that first session with Cheryl, this complete stranger, that at that moment it would literally open the gate, the floodgates of thousands and thousands of families who would lose a child all over the world, to have the opportunity to capture those memories. So what I want to explain about the images themselves, these photographs become the only link that these families have to their child. This is a very tangible gift. This is something that most families, when they lose a child, they don't even know that they're going to lose their child. They go to the hospital with a diaper bag and a nursery, all painted, and they're ready to bring home their beautiful baby that they've waited 9 months for, and then something happens and they lose that child. And it happens so quickly, and there's so much stress and emotional turmoil that many of these families don't even remember what their baby looks like, or how their baby felt, and how much hair she had, and what her little toes looked like. So our photographers capture all of that, and I like to say this: we can't change what's happening to these families, whether we go to the hospital or not, whether we have volunteers or not. These families will lose their babies; they will go home with nothing. What we have the power to do is to give them something that for the entire rest of their lives they will reflect on, and this is probably the greatest healing tool that they will have, the thing that they can go back to and connect with that child. They love that baby as much as they love all of their children, and it's just an incredible honor to know that these photographers sacrifice so much. So for us, of course, from the leadership role and from the executive board role, our biggest thing is we don't, as much as we have thousands of members, we don't have enough. Every single day, somebody calls headquarters and asks for our services. They'll call from all over the world saying, we've seen your work, we know who you are, I'm going to lose my child, or my sister just lost her child, how do we get the service? And there is nothing worse than telling a parent that we can't give them what we have to offer, that we don't have a service provider. It's moments like that you just, it literally rips your heart out, because you know that that's the person that will never have this gift that other people have. So the last thing I'd want to say is I have photographers come to me all the time, and they say, I love your charity and I would love to do it, but I am way too an emotional person. There's no way I would cry. I hear that all the time, and to be honest with you, I have never done a session that I did not tear up or cry. In fact, I'd be very concerned if you could actually do a session and not emotionally connect to it. I would actually be more concerned about you than you realize, because you can't watch a parent say goodbye to their child forever and not have that affect you. It does. You feel it. You feel their pain, and you can sympathize and empathize with them in some cases. But the reality is, what helps you get through is you know that you're going to provide this gift, this tangible thing that they will always reflect back on. So the work is, to me, it's critical. Other organizations who are helping terminally ill people, terminally ill children, those families had an opportunity. They had some time with their child or with the adult that's involved, but our families literally have minutes. Sometimes their babies are already passed away before they're born, and so this is the only thing they get out of that little lifetime, and it's priceless. Ooh.
Where can people, obviously this is important work, where can people who are interested in volunteering or finding out what it takes to be a volunteer, can you tell them where to sign up or where to find out more?
Absolutely. If they go to nowilaymedowntosleep.org or nilmdts.org, they can find out more information about the organization. There's a button that says Find a Photographer. If they click on it, they can download the paperwork and start the process. Now, we don't just need photographers. We need digital retouch artists. These are people who specifically do artwork on files. Maybe they're not capable of doing the sessions, but they can help with the artwork. It's a tremendous service. We have committees and ways that you can spread the word. People do fundraisers. People just make donations. Every penny that goes into that organization, for every dollar that's spent, literally it magnifies by 17, and we're able to provide these services to families everywhere. So that's a great way. If I'm on the road right now. I'm actually teaching a class. I have 32 cities. All of the money that is, it's only $20 for this class. It's $19.95. All of that money goes back to Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep. It does not go to me at all. But this class we do cover a little more in depth. It is a posing and lighting class, but I do a little segment on Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep, give a little more information. And again, for $20, it's a 5-hour class, and all of that money supports that organization. So you can check that out on their website as well, nowilaymedowntosleep.org.
Excellent. Skip, why don't we wrap up this week's show? But for those who missed it, I just want to make sure you all realize you can rebroadcast this. You can share it with others. We'll be also putting this up on Photo Focus and Skip Cohen University. And Skip, we now have 3 episodes in the can, which mean I can officially launch this as a podcast. So there'll be an audio podcast. We'll turn this out there as well so people can download that way.
That's great. Hey, I want to add one more thing to what Sam said. They also need help just in social media. I'm very proud to be a Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep ambassador, whatever fancy title they gave a bunch of us, but it's all about tweeting. I've got 2 guest posts that have had, one had 11,000 downloads and one had 5,000, both of them from mothers of babies, recognizing the gift that Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep and those photographers have given them. It's an amazing opportunity to give back, Rich. And Sam, I love having you on this podcast. See, I can say podcast now too.
Yes.
I'm so glad you were able to join us on Mind Your Own Business today. This has been a fun episode.
Yeah, Sam, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing so honestly with everyone out there. I know that you've given them some courage and also some practical advice so that they can get comfortable as they grow their own business.
Well, thank you so much. It really was a pleasure. I was super excited when Skip called, and he knows he always has to shake me to get me to commit to things, and I did it, and this was great. And the opportunity to share Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep is just such a big blessing. So thank you both.
Excellent.
By the way, I thought for a second there, I thought we ought to have a little line that went across the bottom of the screen anytime that Sam started to tear up a little bit that said, please, if you're at home, this person is a trained professional. Don't try this on your own. But those tears, when she gets emotional, those are real. And I've seen her do it numerous times in presentations, and it's all about the passion of this industry, which we all share, which is a very cool thing. So, Sam, thanks again for finding the time today. And Rich, once again, thank you for doing a great. I keep calling it a podcast.
It's okay. It is now a podcast now, so it'll be available on iTunes soon.
Right.
And thank you again, Sandy, for joining us. I really appreciate everything that you shared.
All right, you guys have a great day, and I'm going to hit the road.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Sam.